G'day legends. I hope that you guys had a fantastic end of the week. I didn't say g'day to you yesterday because I missed a video, but I also hope that you are having so far a fantastic weekend no matter what you're choosing to do. Now, we do have a fair bit to go over today, but I will say it's going to be a little bit wordy, but we do have some very interesting map updates. So, of course, today, just a quick list of what we're going to go over. We're going to look at the maps, the incursion back into Russia from Ukrainian forces, or at least Ukrainian-backed forces, however you want to say it. We'll look at what Macron said. We'll look at some intelligence that has been leaked into a French newspaper as well. We're going to have a look at, of course, the Russian elections that are going on, and some other weapon systems, and a little bit of everything. Of course, we'll talk about the terrible strike that has occurred in Odessa as well. Now, firstly, off the bat, I think what we need to speak about is just the huge amount of misinformation and lies that are coming out about what President Macron, of course, President of France, actually said yesterday when speaking about French soldiers may be going into Ukraine, as he's hinted at over the past couple of weeks, even calling other countries cowards. And the way I see this is France is really just feeling out exactly what NATO feels about putting NATO troops into Ukraine, seeing what the reaction is actually from not only his own country, but other NATO members before making some sort of decision. But there's been complete, just fabricated paragraphs and words about what Macron has actually said. Now, things we need to also remember is Macron in France, at least by the polls, and I know the polls don't always indicate exactly what the country's feeling, but the polls are suggesting that he is not very popular. And in the way that France's political system is made up, and you're down into your smaller towns and whatever, that, you know, your local elected officials, that Macron, one, doesn't have too much power in those areas, his party, and for, I guess, like the federal level, he is showing that he's not very popular. So people are saying this is also maybe a way to buy some votes, but how popular is going to be a war? And other polls are suggesting, Politico said, and that's actually 68% of French people that were then polled said that they wouldn't agree with French soldiers going into Ukraine, although other polls show differently. Now, let's look at what Macron actually has said. So what he's saying, we can't exclude options, and this is this interview here. What we are doing is giving ourselves red lines. Too many limits in our vocabulary regarding the war. So saying that we can't do this, this is a red line. And originally it was deploying tanks is a red line, and aircraft is a red line. We have these red lines that he says we can't have those if Putin doesn't have them. If we decide today to be weak, if in the face of someone who has no limits, being Putin, who has crossed all the limits we have given him, if we naively tell him, I will not go farther than this or that, in a moment we don't decide peace, we decide defeat. Also stressing that if the security of Europe and the security of French people is at stake here. And he talks about how close the war is to France in this as well. But some of the quotes I'm seeing come out about, he said that blah, blah, blah is happening. No, like there's been a lot of just misinformation come up about this. And Ukraine itself has said that they don't need troops in the ground. They need hardware. And one thing I'll say about France, Macron, France has a lot. I've seen German Leopards on the ground in Ukraine. I've seen American Abrams. I've seen United Kingdom Charlies. I haven't seen a French Leclerc, and we haven't seen French fighter jets gone. So, there's part of this as well. And we need to have a look too that France, as far as by GDP, is sitting at number 22 of countries given. Now, this is as a percentage here, so this I don't think is the best way to look at it. But if we have a look at actually then just by assistance by billion, that France is sitting then at number 14, behind places like Poland, Sweden, Belgium, Finland, who have much smaller economies overall than France. So I think if Macron wants to talk about, further supporting from his nation, or from the nation, I shouldn't say his nation, the nation of which he represents democratically, then it probably should be looking more at this aid rather than actual boots on the ground. But we'll go over why that might be a change as well from some leaked intel from France as well. Now, France 24, they've actually turned back on this because it said that it was from a conspiratorial source, but they put out yesterday, and a lot of people picked up this, the French regiments are said to be on their way to Romania in preparation for deployment in Ukraine against the Russian army, notably in Odessa. amongst them the 2nd Foreign Infantry Regiment. So this they had to actually step back on, but that went a little bit of every bloody where, people saying they're deploying, and it turned out that was BS. But again, it's very, very hard to actually cut through in the informational space of what is true, what is not. And it even can be difficult when you're translating things, because other languages, translation is not just word for word. People speak very differently, and it's hard to actually get exactly what is said there. But is France straight away going to deploy troops in on the front? No. And at the end of the day, I believe that just feeling out NATO to see how the rest of NATO feels before anything like that would actually happen. And of course, it's a system that it's a democratically elected system. People need to stay popular and get votes. And some other things are happening in France right now, let's just say, is not awfully bloody popular. Now, of course, this is Odessa down here. This is Ukraine. This is Odessa. There has been a strike today said to be by 2 Iskander missiles. Now, what it seems to have happened here is the first strike has come in, and then there was a delay between the first and second strike. Many refer to this as a double tap. This has been used in many conflicts around the world, where you will hit something, you will then wait for other services to arrive and then hit it again. I guess on the small scale of this is a sniper shooting someone to wound them, so then you have stretcher bearers come in and then you hit them. And it was being reported that this is what happened in Odessa with the 2 Iskander missiles. Now, people are claiming this was against port infrastructure and officials. Now, it's illegal in Ukraine to take photographs of any battle damage like this. So what has been hit, what was the target, we have absolutely no idea yet. The limited photographs we do have is of emergency services personnel being injured, and of course saying people are getting pulled out from under the rubble. Now, this is what Zelensky has said. At this time of filming, there's said to be 19 people confirmed killed. That said, that number is set to rise. But Zelensky said rescue operations in Odessa are still ongoing following another Russian missile strike. The heinous strike by these bastards. 2 missiles were fired, with the second hitting rescuers and medics who had arrived at the scene of the first strike. Emergency medics and state emergency service rescuers have been injured and killed. My condolences to their close loved ones. Dozens of people were injured. The search for people underneath the rubble continues. All necessary services are involved. So, massive strike there. The Russian claims about this is that it has hit port infrastructure and military targets that were supporting in those drone boats that have then, of course, wreaked havoc on the Russian Black Sea fleet. Now, this comes only a week after we saw an Iskander missile strike that was a successful strike in Odessa. So when Zelensky rocked up to one of those bases, then he left. Then within minutes later, then there was an Iskander strike, and then we had confirmation that multiple special forces, Navy personnel of Ukraine were hit and targeted in that strike successfully. So another strike there. So we can see that there are definitely strikes going into Odessa, but this one we have no idea yet exactly what was the target, what has been hit, and what the outcome so far of this has been. So a terrible thing there when civilians are caught up in anything like this. And there's not the first time the claim of, it's not even the 100th time, the claim of something like a double tap like this, which is a terrible, terrible tactic if that is what has been used. So Odessa is going to be in this war, in my opinion, in the coming year, month, whatever, is going to be the most important area for both Ukraine and Russia. Now, of course, this is where Ukraine has its only access to the Black Sea, therefore its only access to trade really with the rest of the world, with a lot of the EU countries here cracking the shits about Ukrainian agricultural product, exporting through here. As well, though, this is where Ukraine is having its success against Russia's Black Sea fleet and potential landings into Crimea. So I think this will be the hub of a lot of ongoing war actions stepping into the future. So we need to speak on as well that these missiles, regardless of what they hit, have gotten through whatever air defense was in this location. And we have spoken about that Russia has had an increase in its ISR and targeting ability over the past maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And we've spoken about, is there something new in the air? Is there new tactics? Is there a reduction in Ukraine's air defense? There are many things that could make up this, and it may not just be one. It may be multiples of these. We saw another radar for an S-300 taken out today, and the loitering drone that puts these on target was just literally floating around then that radar system. So there has been an increase there. Now, what someone has brought to my attention is, well, Willie, this all comes a few weeks after we had that warning from America, the emergency meeting, that Russia had launched something new into space that was apparently an imminent security threat. And since then, we have had these more precise strikes. Could there be some correlation there? Now, I'm not saying that there is some correlation there, but could there be? Potentially. Could it be an increase in GLONASS, which is like the GPS system that Russia used, and that has increased targeting of these systems? Potentially. But again, we're not then 100% sure. Now, I just want to have a quick look over while we're sort of speaking about France and some stuff before the maps. This French paper here, Macron, has put out this, that apparently they've got some leaked intel off some French officials as well that were collecting intel on Ukraine and what is actually going on. So these, it's all behind a paywall. So a friend of mine did just to take out some pieces, translated it for me just to see what's going on. But he said, since then, Western aid has never been so low. It is therefore clear that no Ukrainian offensives can be mounted this year. The West can provide 3D printers to manufacture drones or lurking munitions, but will never be able to print men. Given the situation, it could have been considered reinforcing the Ukrainian army, not with fighters, but with support forces at the rear, allowing Ukrainian soldiers to be freed for the front, admits one high-ranking officer, but the rise in power. So what we're saying here is sort of what we're seeing with what people are suggesting France do. Is Ukraine's problem is, yes, they've got frontline soldiers, but you've got all these people behind the line in logistics, in cooking, in absolutely everything, even mine clearing, that can they be freed up to go onto the front line? And can these non-combat soldiers deploy from NATO countries into non-combat roles to free up more Ukrainians to fight on the front line? It says here's the rising power of Western military personnel in civilian clothes, and can this subcontract out as well? Now, this continues. Tactically show they do not have the human and material capabilities to hold a sector of the front which has been subject to the effort of the attacker. The document continues. The Ukrainian failure at Avdiivka shows that despite the emergency dispatch of the elite 3rd Brigade, 3rd Azov air assault, Kyiv is not capable of locally re-establishing a sector of the front which is collapsing. We'll speak more about Avdiivka in a sec on the maps. It remains to be seen what the Russians will make of this tactical success. Will they continue in the current mode of nibbling and slowly undermining the entire front line, or will they seek to break into depths? The terrain behind Avdiivka allows it. Points at this recent document also warning that Western sources tend to underestimate the Russians, themselves followers of the practice of this, consisting of appearing weak when we are strong. I think there has been this underestimation, especially in the informational sphere of the Russian forces of, we're fighting with shovels, this and that, and now we're seeing this. It's a hard propaganda failure for people then to turn back on. According to this analysis, after 2 years of war, Russian forces have therefore shown their ability to develop operational endurance, which allows them to wage a slow and long-intensity war based on the continued attrition of the Ukrainian army. A pessimistic observation of the future. So I guess, what do you think of that? Of course, none of that is confirmed. I don't know exactly their sources. Of course, none of us know. But it is interesting to have a look at how things have changed and evolved on the front line and how Western influence inside Ukraine. We know there's already a lot of people on the ground, but how could that develop going forth into the future? Now, we need to have a look at the maps, and we need to talk about specifically this map. Now, of course, this is the deep state map. Now, I think disappointingly, because I really like independent work, whether it's journalism, whether it's anything, but deep state map has now come under the Ukrainian MOD. This was released by the Ukrainian Ministry today. The Ministry of Defense Ukraine and Deep State UA, this map, signed a memorandum of cooperation. Deep State UA is an analytical project that highlights information about the course of Russian blah, blah, blah. Cooperation allows us to quickly and efficiently accumulate the process and necessary data. Together, we will be able to work more effectively on a common victory. That said, how unbiased is this going to be? How unbiased was this anyway? Yeah, well, not really, but it's even less so now, I believe. So I don't know. I think maps shouldn't have a bias, whether you like the information coming from the map because your side is you're moving or not. The map should just represent the map. It shouldn't represent everything else. Now, in this as well, then there's been attacks directly at Syriac within the hours of this coming out. Now, people ask me all the time, why do you use Syriac? In my personal experience with these maps, both on the ground in Ukraine or here, Syriac maps tends to be 24 to 72 hours in front of deep state, and more often than not are correct and have it earlier. And as well, in my opinion, he does, publicize when he makes mistakes, and everyone, myself, deep state, everything included, do make mistakes. So if you want to point at a map that just is wrong, point at bloody live UA. Live UA probably still show that Bakhmut is under control. Anyway, let's have a look here. Now, this bloke here, Andrew, he's had mainly the most public go at Syriac, and he's a big Twitter user, 100-something thousand followers, and then Syriac has said he's not happy. Understandable. Everything that supposes an obstacle for his narrative is a problem. Good luck for the next attempt. It will be funny to see you failing again. Always a pleasure. And he said, mistakes you make, and he's calling out that he's going to publish more when he says that Syriac has been lying and following just blindly propaganda. Saying this as well. Should I admit to following Russian propaganda and then slightly correct time to lead me astray? No, blame someone else. Useless old man. Face it, you're a professional clown. I'd say, Andrew, mate, you've got a hell of a lot wrong before you've featured on my channel for outlandish, ridiculous claims prior. So I'll continue using Deep State and Syriac, although I think Syriac does a great job. I think Deep State does do a fairly good job, but I wonder how this will change coming into the future. Now, of course, we are going to have a look at the maps. Of course, this is Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas under occupation since 2022. Purple since 2014. Now, of course, this is Odessa we were speaking about. Now, firstly, we're going to come in and have a look at, I guess, some of the changes on this map, as there has been some. So we'll zoom in down here just above Donetsk city. And, of course, this is Avdiivka, where we did see that quick 20-kilometer advancement from the Russians, and then it has really stalled around Thankyou, Olivka, Berdachi here. But we can see just today, between yesterday today, that we have seen the first movement in a fair while actually on this front line. So Olivka basically all coming under control, same as Thankyou. So we hadn't seen actually a movement here for a fair bit of time. Now let's see what then Syriac says about this. Now we just need to line these up because we get red dots instead for areas. So this is Berdachi, this is Semenivka, this one is Olivka, and this one is Thankyou. Now, my personal opinion is these are showing incredibly similar, except for this advancement in Berdachi here. So we may see that come in the next 24 hours or so. But situation west of Avdiivka, since the beginning of the week, Russian army slowly advanced along the southern parts of Berdachi and reached the Tumour river, which overlooks the locality of Semenivka. So saying there is an advancement up here, but we have seen, shown by these two maps, that there is some level of advancement in this area as well. Now we just need to come down. Pervomayeski here, we did see that Deep State did have a map update earlier, or later I should say, last week, that Russia did make some advancement. We have another Syriac map update here. Now, this is actually showing very similar to what then Deep State is showing now. Remember, I did say last week that I believe Deep State showed more Russian control than actually Syriac did. But northern Donetsk city, so this area here, Russian army reached the eastern shore of this pond and new advances inside Pervomayeski. Of course, Deep State doesn't show this push down around into the south here. Now, we just need to have a look over. Actually, we'll come up to the north. There's been nothing around Bakhmut that shows any difference. And then where we do need to come is up into here, and this is the Terny front. Now, we did see last time I spoke to you a bit of a change of axis here for the Russians, we believe, into this tree line, but since then, no real shift on that. But we do have a Terny update, so I'm scratching my eye, on this map. Now, after almost 3 weeks of fighting, Russian army made new advances west of Terny, reaching positions located 1 kilometre from the first houses of the locality. Meanwhile, clashes with Ukrainian army continue in the southern axis without changes. So, look, See where these tree lines are? Again, this is showing very, very close to each other. So there are advances here. That's the exact advancement that Deep State showed a day or so ago. So, again, I don't know why these ones are fighting each other, because in my opinion, they're actually very, very close to one another. Now, I'm just going to have a quick look down on the map. Of course, this is Avdiivka, Pisky, Mariinka, and Novomaya-Livka. I'll just show you if there's been any changes here. Of course, we did talk about this closing up of Novomaya-Livka here, which we've spoken in length about. Now, we need to have a look on this Uruzani front, where Ukraine had a fair bit of its success in its then infamous now counter-offensive. And we just want to have a look over what the Syriac change was here. Now, just because we don't see too much changes here doesn't mean there's not a hell of a lot of fighting. So this is Zavitny here, and then we see these areas such as Pudotini and Remivka and Stepovi here. So Remivka, so we're talking just up in this area, said that there was a Russian advance. Situation on Zap front. Southwest of Donetsk, Russian army made advances northwest of Pudotini in direction of Levadny. On the other hand, map corrections were made east of Ruzani as Ukraine army have more control of the plantations in this area. So there were then a correction up in the northeast here, shown by Syriac as well, and steps back on when. I'm a fan of Syriac's maps. I agree there's maybe some bias there and that there's some things get wrong, which I can forgive in something as complex as this, but I think he does a really good and fair job. Now, we'll come down into Robotny here. Now, of course, to the south of Orokhiv, where Ukraine had some of its most success, probably the most important front for their counter-offensive, of course, trying to then reach down into Tokmak. Now, we do see a change here of just this. So we do see an increase in grey zone here. So saying that there is less Ukrainian control here, and this tends to line up in the same area of what we have from Syriac here. So of course this is, let me bring up these fortifications so you can get a better idea. So see the fortifications here. Now, Deep State doesn't show this, but Syriac does show that Russia has managed to gain this part of the Surovikin line. We know they were pushing very hard between Verbovi to try and regain that. And in this same area here, where it has shown an increase in grey zone, they're saying that Russia has increased ground. So we know there was a shift there. We 100% know there's a shift there. But at this point in time, we're not 100% sure if it's confirmed or not. So up front, during the last 3 days, Russian army made new advances northwest of Verbovi. So showing on this map as grey, maybe not confirmed. Maybe we'll get an update. And then has shown further, Russian army made new advances northwest of Verbovi. So that was day 750, 751. That just above this paddock here was said to be another advancement in there. So there's movements on the front line, any massive, huge breakthrough movements? No, but there definitely are some, and of course some changes in the maps. Now, one thing I did miss, and I knew there was another change, was that there was a Russian advance, but it's not shown by Syriac, but it is shown by Deep State, between the 14th and the 15th, just to the west of Pavlivka, near Shevchenko, in this region, to the east of Novomayersky. So this isn't shown anywhere, but we'll presume because this is now the MOD, Ukrainian MOD map, if it shows a Russian advance, we know they're probably advanced here in the direction of Ugledar. Now, what we have heard about is that Ugledar is the ultimate goal to get down in this region once Novomaya-Livka and these areas, to try and get that because of the amount of support it can give to other satellite villages around here. So an advancement in there. But that is it. Where we need to speak about next, and it's impossible to get reasonable information about this, is where then Ukrainian-backed forces, whatever you're going to call them, like if you're going to call the Donetsk-backed forces Russian-backed forces and they're fighting for Russia, if you just call them Russian forces, then I agree we can just call these Ukrainian forces regardless of, I guess, what their passport says. But of course, this incursion into Russia. Now, we have a little bit of update on this, but it's so difficult. It's impossible to get an idea of what is actually happening here due to just the lies and the huge claims, and then geolocated stuff that has been in Ukraine. It's so hard to get an idea of actually what is happening here, because either way, you're going to have to believe either the Russian MOD, who of course has been caught with their pants down multiple times, or the RDK, or whatever they call themselves, have been caught with their pants down recently as well. So it's very, very difficult. But one thing we do know is there is definitely an increase in shelling and mortar fire, both in Belgorod and Kursk here. Now, of course, we've got these multiple break-ins. Now, they are saying they are going further out towards Gavaron here and Shevchenko, as well as up into Tetkino, but we don't know what success is actually being had here. We'll look at what Surak says. We'll look at what then the Russians say here as well. Well, the RDK, I should say, the Ukrainian-backed forces, in connection with the conduct of limited military operation territory of Kursk, Belgorod, we again call for urgent evacuations of the residents in here. Save your lives and the lives of your children. We see that Putin's troops are hiding among civilians, so the task is to maximum security for the local population. In this regard, they're announcing the organisation of humanitarian corridors, so saying leave or take cover, as there's going to be more attacks into these regions. Now, how deep or success here? We don't have any. We don't have anything. We've got claims. We've got little bits and pieces of some geolocations. Some of them are wrong. But why are we seeing this? Well, we're going to go over that. And it's for, of course, the Russian elections. Now, fighting on the northern side continued today. So this is what Surak says about this. Russian militias supported by the Ukrainian army are building up in Kharkiv and Sumy Oblasts with the aim of launching a new attempt to advance on Russian soil. Another axis was opened today in the Gavaron region. So this is right here. Now, of course, this is the Kharkiv Oblast. This is the Sumy Oblast. Right in between here is where we saw then that attack get spoiled actually a few days early because a Russian drone saw some howitzers, so some artillery and some tanks in here and bombed it in a forest down here as well. So this attack may have been much larger if that wasn't seen earlier. Russian artillery has significantly increased its activity along the border in an attempt to significantly damage these reinforcements. So one thing people will point out too, the artillery here, yes, the people that may be crossing are, Russian nationals as they claim, or foreign nationals, but the artillery in here is getting fired from Ukrainian soil into here. Now, regardless of whether these are who's putting the bomb up the spout, whatever their passport says, you can't say that it's not a Russian. You can't say that it's not a Ukrainian force launching to try and have some level of civil war, I guess, in here. It is possible that the Russian militias have finally succeeded in forcing the Russian army to divert reinforcements to these regions, especially just hours before the start of the Russian elections. So to divert forces away from somewhere to try and stabilise what's happening, which is what we've spoken about. These guys, there's no hope they're going to march into bloody Moscow. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough logistic support anyway. But if you can just move then troops away from another area of the front line or from somewhere in Moscow, whatever, it may increase your success on the front line or for partisan actions behind the line. The next few hours will be crucial for the Free Russian Army. Should they be able to establish a bridgehead on Russian soil, it will be a great propaganda victory for them and will force the Russian army to divert its attention to these areas to the detriment of other fronts. However, their defeat will significantly boost the reputation of the Russian government and support for Putin in Russia. Now, this is very interesting. Boost the reputation of the Russian government and support for Putin in Russia. I think that this is what they could doing could actually backfire, because if you're one of the people that live in here and you're listening to state television and you're hearing there's Nazis across the border and they're bombing into Donetsk, and next thing you're seeing this, then you may start believing it and go, well, Putin's then telling us the truth. Maybe that's what you're going to see. And I think it could actually be a propaganda backfire in here. And this Ukrainian page here, popular Ukrainian page, has said very similar. It's an opinion piece. I'm concerned that Ukrainian GUR SBU, so the intelligence agencies, miscalculated by having the RDK LSV, so these are the Russian units, conduct attacks in Belgrade and Kursk during the elections. All the bombs, shooting fires and other chaos in Moscow, St. Petersburg and elsewhere are a Kremlin false flag operation to justify full mobilization. Or it's just pissed off people. There's people that aren't happy about what's happening. But the draconian suspension of personal rights through martial law and militarization of the economy after the election. So all this being done to then say, look, we need this, and then mobilize more people. In short, Putin knows he will be reappointed, which means he has another 6 years to do whatever he wants. And having these Russian-backed units attacking Russian cities and the unavoidable civilian deaths and injuries resulting from the attacks will only play out in Putin's favor. And I actually agree with this. What I also worry about is that Putin will have a renewed sense of invincibility after the elections, and he will not stop at the annexed regions of Ukraine, given the chance Odessa, Moldova and other areas are now at risk of dire survival. So and then say why Speaker Johnson needs to put that money through. Speaker Johnson today has come out and said it's very likely that the money will go through. So we're waiting for that. But we can't show you the video, but below here, I'll put it on the Telegram if you're interested, but where Russian soldiers were killed there. So I think this is actually a really good take on this. Is this actually potentially a huge propaganda backfire that is happening here? Now, we need, of course, then speak about the elections. This is why all this is happening, and this is why we're seeing an increase in partisan actions inside Russia, with reports coming out that the FSB has even spoiled major chemical poisoning attacks. And we continue to see that Ukrainian drones launch deep into Russian territory, striking many oil and gas facilities. Now, before we speak on the election, I actually had a friend reach out to me who he was celebrating the success of these drone attacks, punching through the defenses, but he did say to, maybe not have too much excitement about these, because he did advise me saying the damage to these facilities will actually be a lot less than some will actually report, and maybe that it looks like because of the flammable liquids that's actually hitting. Because these facilities, firstly, they're absolutely massive, and some areas of it are actually under concrete and bolstered as well for things like this. But these facilities, they're literally made to control fire and explosions just due to the nature of their operations. It's bloody oil and gas. So these facilities have a lot of systems in place to isolate areas very quickly, as well as really great fire and explosion suppression systems. And that some areas are actually very quick to rebuild too. This is a very, very hard target to take out and can be isolated quickly. They're built for an explosion in some sense. But it's very interesting to speak about. Now, in Russia, we are seeing, of course, the elections go on. We get more and more footage of people pouring then ink into these ballot boxes here, of course, ruining the votes that have then occurred here. And these people, we don't know what sort of trouble they would be in. I'd say a lot. But we then see, this. We're seeing this a fair bit, as well as there are a lot of rise-ups around Russia as well as this election is going on. And of course, the propaganda is in overdrive, and people trying to squash propaganda too is in overdrive as well. So what will be the fate of these elections? Well, if I was a betting man, I know which way I'd bet. But what will we see after this? Will we see massive mobilization, because then Putin's guaranteed another 6 years, potentially? We saw Navalny. We saw all this come out. So again, we're not 100% sure yet. Now, lastly, what we'll look over is this very interesting weapon here. Now, this is RBK 500 on glide wings, and this is actually a cluster munition here. So, of course, dropping these bomblets. We can get a good look at, though, this system here of the glide wings, everything here. So, we see the glide wings, then we do see some looking like electronical system into here. Now, this could mean that there is some, some GLONASS GPS system, which we have spoken about. These do have some movement, but we can see this system here, of course, being dropped. This is like the fabs are typically made up, but now we're seeing it with the glide cluster bomblets as well, which are incredibly dangerous, not only when they're dropping, but also on the ground, because then they act as a landmine. And we actually see one of these bomblets here, which I would not go anywhere near, because these are unbelievably bloody dangerous once they're on the ground, that they are just a live thing. And we see it looking like a little ball here. It'd be easy to drive over, pick up, whatever. So we see that system. Now, I did have something else to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it tomorrow because the videos are already getting too long. Legends, thanks again. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.